They forgot my birthday again. But they remembered the reservation at the restaurant I own now. It's funny how people remember when something becomes expensive. I used to think birthdays were about love, attention, little gestures that said, "You matter." But growing up, mine was always an afterthought. My mother would remember the date 2 days late. My father would shrug and joke that he was bad with calendars. And my sister, well, she'd be too busy planning her own parties to notice mine slipping quietly by. When I was little, I used to bake my own cake. Nothing fancy, a cheap mix from the store, the kind with powdered icing. I'd light a candle, whisper my wish, and blow it out before anyone walked into the kitchen. Sometimes I'd imagine the sound of people singing to me. But the house was always too quiet for that kind of thing. By the time I was 15, I stopped expecting anything. I learned to make myself small on that day, to disappear before the disappointment arrived. But the thing about being invisible is, you start to see everything. You see who people cheer for, who they post about, who gets the gifts and the love and the effort. You learn the pattern of being forgotten so well that it becomes almost comforting. When I turned 19, I was working part-time at a diner. It wasn't glamorous, grease-stained aprons, sticky menus, and long shifts that left your feet aching. But it was mine. The tips were good, and the regulars remembered my name. I'd pour coffee, refill water glasses, and listen to people talk about their lives. Families celebrating anniversaries, coworkers sharing laughs, couples fighting softly over bills. I noticed something that stayed with me. The way food brought people together. The way someone always remembered the occasion. I think that's why I fell in love with restaurants. They were everything my childhood wasn't. Warm, alive, full of memory. I worked my way up slowly. Waitress to shift lead to assistant manager. I took night classes in hospitality and bookkeeping. My parents barely noticed. They'd ask, "Still working at that place?" And I'd nod, not bothering to explain that I was managing payroll by then. I learned to stop craving their pride. When my sister graduated college, they threw her a big party. Balloons, catered food, family photos everywhere. I stood in the corner that day, refilling punch bowls, pretending not to notice no one had asked about my job or my upcoming birthday. That night, when everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean. My father hugged my sister and said, "You're the one who'll make us proud." I remember standing in the kitchen, hands wet with soap, thinking, maybe one day I'll be someone worth celebrating. 2. A year later, the diner closed. The owner, Mr. Patel, was retiring after 30 years. He told me, "You have the patience for this work, but more than that, you have the heart. Don't lose that." Before he left, he sold me his recipe notebook for $50. Thick. Handwritten pages full of dishes that tasted like comfort. That notebook became my blueprint. For the next 3 years, I worked everywhere I could. Catering gigs, hotel kitchens, even a food truck that sold grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight. I learned from every chef, every customer complaint, every burnt batch of bread. I saved every dollar I could. My parents thought I was wasting my time. "You should find something stable," my mother said once, scrolling through her phone while I tried to explain my plan. "A restaurant? Do you know how many fail in the first year?" I didn't answer. I just nodded and went back to saving. By the time I was 28, I had $47,000 in savings and a vision that wouldn't let me sleep. I found an old building downtown, the same one where I used to pass by every morning on my way to work. It had peeling paint, cracked windows, and a for lease sign that everyone ignored. But I saw what it could be. When I told my family, they laughed. My father said, "A restaurant? That's not a career. That's a hobby." My sister said, "Don't put all your money into something that'll just stress you out." No one offered to help, but that wasn't new. I'd stopped expecting help long ago. I signed the lease anyway. For the first few months, it was chaos. Construction dust, unpaid bills, and nights when I fell asleep on the floor because I couldn't afford to waste time going home. But every morning I'd get up, look at the sunlight streaming through the front windows, and whisper, This is mine. The first night we opened, only 14 people came. Most were curious neighbors, but by the second week there were lines outside the door. People loved the food, Mr. Patel's recipes mixed with my own. They said it tasted like real life, like home. I named the restaurant Mara's Table after my grandmother, the only person who ever remembered my birthdays. It wasn't until the third month that I got the text from my mom. Can we get a reservation for 4? Dad's birthday dinner? I read it twice. She had never been to any of my jobs before. Never once asked what time I worked or what the name of my restaurant was. But now they wanted a table. For his birthday, I smiled. I didn't reply right away. I waited until the next morning, then sent back a short message. Of course. I'll make sure it's special. When they arrived that evening, I stood by the front window, hidden behind the host stand, watching them take in the space. My mother's eyes widened when she saw the photos on the wall. All the dishes I'd created, all the faces of customers who had become family. My father smiled at the design, said something like, "This place must make good money." My sister took selfies. I stood by the kitchen door that night, half hidden by the steam and the noise, watching my family sit at a table they didn't realize I owned. The irony of it almost made me laugh. They were smiling, ordering food, snapping pictures, tagging each other in posts that read, "Family dinner at this amazing place." I'd spent years serving other families at tables just like that, watching people celebrate milestones, toast each other, make memories. My family, meanwhile, had never once celebrated me. And now here they were, sitting in the middle of everything I'd built. I didn't tell them it was mine, not yet. I wanted to watch them, to see them through the same lens I had as a child, from the outside, unnoticed, but quietly observing every detail. My father called the waiter over, bragging about how he knew good food when he tasted it. My sister smiled wide, recording herself for her followers. My mom complained about the menu prices, whispering, "These places charge so much just for presentation." They had no idea their daughter had designed every dish, every detail of the place, down to the color of the napkins and the shape of the candles flickering between them. I thought about all the birthdays they'd skipped, the years they forgot to call, the times I pretended not to care when I actually cried myself to sleep. Those memories didn't come as pain anymore, just quiet reminders of who I used to be. The girl who waited to be seen. When I was 20, I'd invited them to my birthday dinner at the diner where I worked. I had been so proud. I'd saved up to buy a chocolate cake from the bakery next door. I set the table with little paper flowers I made myself, hoping it would feel special. But no one came. My mom texted, "Your dad's tired," and my sister said, "I forgot to get you something, sorry." I remember sitting there after my shift ended, blowing out my own candle, pretending it was fine. The cook, an older man named Luis, sat across from me and said, "Don't waste your heart on people who don't show up." I never forgot that. Maybe that's why. In the years that followed, I stopped inviting them to anything. I learned that silence hurt less than disappointment. But that night, watching them laugh in my restaurant, something inside me softened. Not into forgiveness exactly, but understanding. They didn't know how to celebrate me because they never learned how to celebrate themselves. My parents had grown up on survival, not love. Their way of showing care was through criticism and caution. My sister followed their pattern, performing happiness, never feeling it. The waiter brought their meals out. Each plate a small piece of my story, recipes built from nights I'd spent experimenting in my cramped apartment kitchen. My mother's steak came out perfectly cooked, the same way I used to make it for her when she was too tired to cook after work. My father's mashed potatoes were whipped with butter and garlic, the way he liked them when I was a kid. My sister's pasta, creamy, rich, indulgent, was the dish I'd made for her once in high school when she'd gotten dumped and cried in my lap. Every plate carried a memory, whether they realized it or not. When they finished eating, my manager, David, walked over and said, "The owner would like to send dessert on the house." My mom smiled, impressed. "Oh, that's nice," she said. "People like that must really appreciate their customers." I walked out then, slowly, calmly, wearing my black blazer and name tag that simply read Mara. My sister saw me first. "Oh my God, you work here?" she said, laughing like it was a joke. I smiled. "Something like that." My father nodded approvingly. "Looks like you moved up from that diner, huh? This place must pay well." The moment stretched between us like a held breath. I could have let it go. Could have just smiled and walked away, let them stay in their comfortable ignorance. But something inside me, not anger, not revenge, just truth, told me it was time to stop pretending. "I don't work here," I said quietly. "I own it." The table went silent. My mom blinked first. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, "this is my restaurant. I built it. Every plate you just ate from, every paycheck in this place, every light you're sitting under, it's mine." My father's hand froze halfway to his glass. My sister looked around like she was trying to find proof. My mom opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "You're serious?" I nodded. For the first time in my life, they didn't have anything to say. No backhanded compliment. No dismissive joke. Just silence. The kind that comes when people realize they were wrong about you all along. Finally, my mother managed, "You should have told us." I smiled. "You should have remembered." It wasn't said with bitterness, just truth. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. They left not long after that. My father shook my hand awkwardly. My sister hugged me like she was posing for a picture, and my mother lingered by the door before saying, "The food was wonderful." When they were gone, I stood at the window, watching them walk to their car. My chest felt light, not with pride, but with peace. I didn't need them to understand what it took to get here. I just needed them to see it once. That night, after everyone left and the lights were dim, I sat at table 7, the one they'd eaten at, and placed a small candle in the middle. It wasn't my birthday. It wasn't anyone's. For 2 days after that dinner, I didn't hear from them. No text, no call. No questions. Just silence, that familiar kind that used to make me feel invisible. But this time it didn't sting the same way. It just confirmed what I already knew, that some people need time to adjust when the version of you they built no longer fits. The morning after their visit, I walked through the restaurant before opening. The chairs were still stacked on tables. The scent of coffee brewing drifted from the kitchen, and sunlight spilled across the floor. It felt different now, lighter. For years, I'd built everything in this space with the hope of being seen. Now I was finally seen, but not for approval. Just for truth. David, my manager, came in carrying boxes of produce. "Your family handled that better than most would," he said, smiling knowingly. I laughed softly. "You think so?" He shrugged. They didn't storm out. That's progress. He was right. That was progress. For them and for me. That week, business kept booming. We had a line out the door every Friday. Reviews piling up online with words like warm, comforting, real. I'd walk past tables of strangers laughing, sharing food, celebrating milestones. Every sound of joy felt like healing. Each plate I sent out wasn't just a meal. It was a small act of reclamation. Then, on the following Sunday, I got a call from my mother. It was her first in months. I stared at the screen for a while before answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was unusually quiet. "Your father and I talked. We didn't realize how much you'd done. I guess we weren't paying attention." "I noticed," I said gently. There was a pause. Then she said, "Your father wants to come by sometime." "Maybe for lunch?" I almost smiled. "You want a reservation?" She hesitated, then laughed softly. "Yeah, for 2. When they arrived that Wednesday afternoon, the restaurant was quiet. Just a few regulars and soft jazz playing in the background. I didn't wear my blazer this time. Just a plain apron. My father looked uncomfortable at first, like the idea of being served by his daughter made him nervous. My mother, on the other hand, looked around the place with a sort of awe she was trying hard to hide. "You did all this by yourself?" she asked finally. Mostly, I said. I had help along the way. But yeah, I did. They nodded, looking around like they were seeing me for the first time. When their food came, my father picked up his fork, took a bite, and said, "You always were stubborn." Guess it paid off. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. After they left, I went back to the kitchen and sat on the counter, remembering all the years when stubbornness was the only thing that kept me going. The nights I'd stay up after closing, covered in flour and sweat, writing lists of what needed fixing, calculating how long I could stretch the next paycheck. Every sacrifice, every quiet decision no one noticed had led to this. Not revenge, but independence. Over the next few months, they started coming by more often. Not for birthdays or big occasions, just to eat. Sometimes they'd bring friends, sometimes just each other. My mother would compliment the decor. My father would talk about the importance of small businesses, as if the words didn't feel awkward in his mouth. The first time my sister came back, it was with her fiancé. She looked different, polished, confident, a little nervous. She hugged me, told me how proud she was, then asked half-jokingly if I was hiring. I smiled, told her we were always looking for good hosts. She laughed, thinking I was teasing. I wasn't. A few weeks later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Celebrate my own birthday. Not quietly, not with a single candle at home, but right here in the restaurant that had become my sanctuary. I invited my staff, a few friends from the catering days, even Mr. Patel, the old diner owner who'd given me that first chance. We closed early that night. The tables were covered in candles and old photos, snapshots of every version of me that had led here. There was laughter, clinking glasses, a cake that wasn't made from a mix. Halfway through the evening, I looked up and saw my parents standing in the doorway. My mother was holding a small gift bag, my father a folded envelope. For a second, the room went quiet. My heart thudded in my chest. My mom smiled, hesitant but genuine. "We didn't forget this year," she said softly. I swallowed hard, then nodded toward an empty table. "There's room for you," I said. They joined us, awkward at first, but after a few minutes, something eased. My father even told one of my cooks how I used to experiment in the kitchen when I was a kid. My mom handed me the gift, a necklace with a tiny silver spoon pendant. "For good luck," she said. It wasn't expensive, but it was the first birthday present I could ever remember her giving me. Later, after everyone left and I was locking up, I sat alone again in the dining room. The lights were dim, the candles melted down to small pools of wax. Outside, the city hummed softly, alive but distant. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing what I already had now: peace, purpose, and a name on the door that finally meant something. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. "Next year, dinner's on me." I smiled, knowing she probably meant it. For the first time, my birthday didn't feel like a reminder of what I lacked. It felt like proof of how far I'd come. That night, I blew out a candle again. But this time, I didn't wish to be remembered. I wished to keep remembering. Every failure, every lonely shift, every quiet victory that led me here. Because now I knew something no one could take from me. Some people will only remember you when you become impossible to ignore. The first year of owning the restaurant felt like breathing for the first time after holding it in too long. Every morning, when I unlocked the doors and felt that cool metal turn in my hand, I was reminded that this was mine. No one could tell me I didn't deserve it, or that it wasn't practical, or that I should have waited for the right time. Still, success has a strange way of drawing old ghosts. It started with small things. My mother would stop by during lunch rushes, standing near the hostess stand, pretending to look at the menu. My father would call just to check in, but somehow always asked about revenue, staff size, whether I was paying off loans yet. I didn't mind it, at least not at first. I wanted to believe they were trying. Then one afternoon, as I was reviewing invoices in the office, I overheard them talking in the dining area. My mother's voice, soft, familiar, carried through the door. "She's lucky this worked out," she said. Otherwise, she'd be asking us for help again. I froze, pen in hand. My father chuckled. Yeah, but she's always been dramatic. Remember when she cried about that old birthday cake thing? Kids are so sensitive. I sat there perfectly still, staring at the numbers on the page while their words blurred into noise. Dramatic, sensitive, lucky. The same old vocabulary they'd always used to shrink me. That night, when the last table cleared, I stayed behind long after closing. The lights dimmed to soft amber, and the kitchen hummed with the faint sound of cooling equipment. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out through the front windows. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the girl they used to dismiss. It was a woman who'd built something from the ground up, someone who no longer needed their validation, and yet their words still lingered. The next morning, I decided to shift focus. If my parents couldn't see my worth, fine. Others did. I started mentoring 2 of my line cooks, young women with the same kind of quiet fire I once had. They'd come in early, stay late, take notes during tastings. Watching them grow gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. One night, as we cleaned up after a big wedding event, one of them, Jenna, asked, "Do you ever wish your family saw what you do?" I thought for a moment before answering. I used to. Now I just hope I never stop seeing it. She smiled like she understood exactly what I meant. By the end of that year, we were featured in a local magazine. They called the restaurant A Quiet Revolution in Comfort Dining. The cover photo was me, standing behind the counter, flour on my apron, smiling like someone who finally belonged. That issue somehow made its way to my parents' mailbox. I didn't send it. A week later, my father called. His voice was different this time, clipped, almost proud. "We saw your picture," he said. "Your mother wants to frame it." "Tell her she doesn't need to," I said softly. "It's just one article," he hesitated. "Still, it's nice. You made something real." For a moment, I almost thanked him. But something inside me shifted instead. I realized I didn't need the compliment anymore. Not the validation, not the approval. What I wanted was acknowledgement, and that's a very different thing. That Christmas, I decided not to go home. Not out of anger, but peace. I sent gifts instead. Practical ones, a blanket for my mom, a gift card from my dad's favorite hardware store. Then I spent the evening at the restaurant with my staff. We cooked, we ate, we laughed until the candles burned out. When I got home that night, I saw a message from my sister. "Mom's upset you didn't come." "Dad says you've changed," I smiled to myself. I have. The next week, my parents showed up at the restaurant again, but this time they weren't just customers. They had company. My uncle, 2 cousins, even a family friend I hadn't seen in years. Apparently, word had gotten around about my little restaurant. Suddenly, I wasn't the black sheep. I was the showpiece. They took photos. They tagged me online. They told everyone how proud they were. And for the first time in my life, I didn't correct them. I let them take their pictures. I smiled. I poured their drinks. I listened as they bragged about my daughter, the businesswoman. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because I'd learned something far more powerful than revenge. When people finally see you, you get to decide how much of you they see. Later that night, when the doors were locked and the last candle flickered out, I sat in the quiet again, the same silence I used to hate. But now it felt like home. I realized something simple but profound. Forgiveness isn't. It was spring when everything came full circle. The restaurant had just celebrated its 3rd anniversary. We'd survived inflation, staff turnover, and even a plumbing disaster that nearly shut us down. And somehow we came out stronger. But the real test wasn't business. It was blood. One morning, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was tight, polite in that strained way that meant she wanted something. "Your father's retiring," she began. "We're planning a dinner. The club's booked, but they said the kitchen's under renovation. We thought maybe we could host it at your place." At first, I thought I misheard. "You want to host his retirement dinner at my restaurant?" "Yes," she said quickly as if afraid I'd say no. It would mean a lot to him. Just family, maybe 20 people. You wouldn't have to do much, just reserve the space. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. For a moment, I thought about every forgotten birthday, every time I was told to be reasonable or stop making everything about you. And now, suddenly, everything was about me. Of course, I said after a pause. We'll make it special. When the night came, the restaurant glowed like a scene from a film, candlelight flickering off the brick walls, soft jazz humming, tables dressed in crisp white linen. My staff moved like choreography, every motion fluid and practiced. I didn't tell anyone this was my parents' event. I wanted them to see it, not feel it performed. When my family arrived, the air changed. My father wore a dark suit, my mother her best pearls. My sister came with her husband and 2 kids. They all looked proud and a little uncertain. My father pulled me aside before dinner. "You've done well, kid," he said. His tone was softer than I remembered. "You built something solid." "Thanks," I said simply. "I learned from watching what not to do." He blinked, unsure if I was joking. I smiled before he could answer. "Come on, dinner's ready." Throughout the evening, I watched them, how they spoke about me, how easily they took ownership of my story. "She always had a good head on her shoulders," my mother said to a guest. "She's the driven one," my father added proudly, as if the years of dismissal had been replaced with selective memory. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt detached, like I was watching actors play a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. When dessert was served, I brought out a small cake. Vanilla, my father's favorite. I placed it in front of him and said, "Congratulations, Dad, you've earned it." Everyone clapped. Cameras flashed. My father smiled, and in that smile I saw it. The same pride I'd once begged for, now given freely because it made him look good. Later, when the guests began to leave, my mother lingered. "You really made it beautiful tonight," she said softly. "We're proud of you, you know." I looked at her, at the woman who'd once told me, "You don't need college, you're not that type. And cooking isn't a career." And I said, "I know," she smiled, thinking it was acceptance. But it wasn't. It was closure. When the door finally closed behind them, the room fell silent again. The kind of silence that used to feel heavy, but now felt earned. My manager, David, walked over and said, "That looked intense." I laughed softly. "You have no idea," he smiled. "Well, they'll be talking about this night for years." "Good," I said. "Let them." That weekend, I received a message from my father. "Thank you for hosting. Everyone said it was the best meal they've had." "We're proud of you, sweetheart." I read it twice, then put my phone down. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stepped out back, where the smell of rosemary and grilled bread hung in the air. The night was cool, the city humming softly beyond the alley. I thought about that girl who used to sit in her childhood kitchen, waiting for someone to remember her birthday, how small she felt, how invisible. And I realized something. That invisibility was the soil I grew from. The emptiness they left behind was the space I filled with purpose. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. 2 weeks later, my mother stopped by again, this time alone. She looked tired but peaceful. "I wanted to pay for the dinner," she said, holding out her card. I shook my head. "It's handled." "Still," she insisted. "It's the right thing to do." I looked at her, at this woman who had once believed I'd never make it. Then I said quietly, "You already paid, Mom, just not with money." She didn't respond. She just nodded, eyes glistening, and left without another word. That night, after closing, I turned off the lights and sat by the front window. The street outside was empty. A few cars passed, the city humming like a lullaby. I whispered to myself, "They forgot my birthday again. But they remembered this." And somehow that was enough. Because some memories aren't meant to be rewritten. The first birthday after the retirement dinner came quietly. No grand gestures, no surprises. Just a morning filled with sunlight streaming through my apartment window and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the air. I didn't expect anyone to remember. But that didn't hurt anymore. I walked down to the restaurant early, long before opening. The city was still waking up. Shopkeepers unlocking doors, buses sighing at corners, the hum of traffic beginning its slow climb. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and roasted beans. My sanctuary. I took a seat at the front window, the same place where I used to sit years ago, when the restaurant was just a dream on a napkin. I opened my old recipe journal, the one with grease stains and torn corners, and smiled at the handwriting that once trembled with fear. Back then, I'd written, "One day they'll see." Now, I wrote beneath it, "I did." Around noon, Jenna and my team arrived, carrying balloons and a small cake. They shouted, "Happy birthday, boss!" and burst into laughter when they saw my face. I couldn't help but laugh. 2. The cake was homemade, a little uneven, covered in pink frosting, with the words, "To the woman who feeds everyone." I didn't cry, but my throat tightened in that warm, quiet way. They sang, they cheered, and for a moment, the restaurant filled with so much joy it felt like the walls could burst from it. After everyone left for lunch, I sat at the bar, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed, a message from my mother. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We're at your restaurant now. It's full. Couldn't get a table. Proud of you." For a long time, I stared at that text. No guilt, no longing. Just a soft, peaceful smile. It wasn't about being forgotten anymore. It was about being unreachable in the best way. Not from distance, but from growth. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I stayed after closing. The air outside was cool and golden, the sound of laughter fading down the street. Inside, the last candle flickered in its glass, reflecting off the framed article still hanging by the counter. I thought about every version of myself I'd been. The girl who waited for a call that never came, the young woman who worked 2 jobs just to keep her dream alive, the business owner who stood in front of her parents and didn't flinch. And then I whispered something softly. Just for me. They didn't forget me. They just never really saw me, but I did, and I never looked away again. I locked up, turned off the lights, and stepped outside. The city breeze carried the faint smell of garlic and wine from the nearby cafes. I pulled my coat around me and looked back through the glass one last time. There it was. My name on the door, glowing in the reflection of the streetlights. Not a family name, not a gift, not a hand-me-down, mine. I smiled, whispered goodnight to the life I built, and walked away. Not from pain, but into peace. Because revenge, I